All right, so you got your beer?
Yep. I got a nice Belgian white.
Excellent. I also have that. How apropos.
Yeah. I think that might have more to do with the time that we're recording this than anything else. At least for me.
Yeah, fair enough.
Because
there
aren't any imported beers anymore.
Oh, really?
I can only find bottles of imported beer, and I prefer cans.
Do you? Where do you get your beer?
Food Lion. I mean, I'm not in like a beer store or anything. So It's just like there's no selection anymore. It's terrible.
So okay, so you aren't going to like Total Wine or something where?
No. I pick up a case every week when I go shopping, and that's it.
Okay, that's fair enough. I guess that makes sense. Well, I'm drinking the Belgian wit beer that I brewed. So.
Oh, okay. Well, that's special.
That is special. I feel like I'm getting down to the end of the keg, and whenever that happens, I always play this very worrying game that I call beer keg roulette, where every time I pull another beer off the keg, I'm like, is this going to be the one that's the end of it, and then I have to go clean the keg?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So, like, I try not to, maybe, like, at the beginning of the keg, I might have, like, a beer or two, during the week. But once I'm starting to get towards the end of the keg, I start thinking, oh, boy, do I really want to have to clean this keg in the middle of the week? Do I really want to have to clear my beer lines in the middle of the week? I don't think I really want to.
Oh, I see. Yeah, because you have to also clear the line. I mean, isn't leaving it disgusting anyway? I mean...
What do you mean?
Like... The longer it sits there, isn't there just more air in the container at that point, or is that not how kegs work?
No, it's not. Okay, so I didn't think we were going to jump right into it, but let's jump into beer kegging for a moment. And I might want to bullshit with you a little bit before we get like heavy into the rest of the beer topic. But
yes, I agree. But yeah, no, explain to me how kegs work.
Let me explain to you.
Don't know.
Absolutely. Okay, so basically a kegerator, which is what I have, is essentially it's a mini fridge, which you put a keg into. You could put whatever. I mean, as long as the keg physically fits in the mini fridge, you could basically put whatever you want into it. And then it's got like, a hole cut through the top for, a tap, basically. And then you have a hole that's out the back for a CO2 line. And so,
okay.
I have a CO2 canister, I think it's like a 7-pound CO2 canister out the back. And so a keg basically has two, they're called posts. There's an in-post and an outpost. The in-post is gas. The outpost is beer. So yeah, exactly. So basically you put the keg on you put the CO2 on it, and then you hook that to the in, you hook the liquid to the out, and the liquid of course goes to the tap. And so as beer comes out of the keg, CO2 goes in, and there is never any air. And in fact, the first step of actually kegging a beer is you purge the oxygen from the headspace. You basically add CO2, like burp it, add CO2, burp it, add CO2, burp it, so that there is physically no air, because air is the enemy of beer. As I will
say, yeah.
Yeah, as I will opine on numerous times during this podcast.
So wait, is that how what about a regular keg? Like you'd get at like a party?
I have no idea.
You just have to drink that whole thing?
I actually have no idea. Having never purchased a keg on my own for a party and had to be responsible. I mean, I've drank out of kegs at parties, but never having been the person who's responsible for them. I actually have no idea how they work.
I think I might have seen a keg in real life once, but I've never had anything from a keg.
I have had a keg at a party, I think maybe twice. And honestly, seemed like it was more hassle than it was, notwithstanding people's homebrew.
Oh, sure. Yeah, of course. That's different.
But like an actual, I bought a keg of Heineken, I think once for sure.
It seems like a weird thing to do when you could just buy cases.
It's honestly, it was really inconvenient. Like that was the one big takeaway for me was this, it was a pain in the ass because every time that they tried to, get it carbonated properly or whatever they were trying to do, it wasn't work. And maybe that was the thing. Do you have to have a CO2 canister? I'm trying to remember if they had a little CO2 canister to run the keg, because you do.
Your description of how keg works makes me think that you'd have to have some manner of
you must
gas.
Because you need pressure in the keg for anything to come out of it. It's not like, I mean, it's not gravity fed. It's, it's fed by CO2. So I think there must have been like a little CO2 canister somewhere, or even a big one for all I know.
I mean, you have to rent kegs, so I guess it makes sense.
Yeah, I can't imagine that you don't need a CO2 canister to run a keg, or a nitro canister, as the case may be, like if you're doing like Guinness or something, and that's a whole different can of worms. But
are kegs like an American? I mean, are kegs like a North American thing? Or like, is Europe big on kegs? It seems like parts. I mean, I'm sure fucking Great Britain is.
Well, I mean, like everywhere is big on kegs in the sense of like if you're serving beer, you're serving it probably
out of kegs, of course. Yeah, that's how. God.
Yeah. So but like kegs at parties, I don't know. That to me has the feeling of a North American thing, but that just might be my bias.
Because red cups, like having like plastic cups at a party, is an American thing.
Yeah,
like, strictly.
But like, every time, like, I mean, I say every time, like the 1 or 2 times that, somebody had a keg at a party, I just remember the beer being super foamy because they could never get the carbonation right or like the serving pressure right. And it was just like a whole thing, which again, this leads me to believe that there must have been.
Yes.
Yeah, there just has to be, because otherwise how could it work? It literally needs pressure.
Huge pain in the ass. Just buy cans.
Yeah. So, but for the purposes of beer brewing, a keg is the best. It is the best because bottling is an enormous bitch.
But those are the only 2 options: is bottling or kegging.
I mean, you could also can your beer, but again, you're running into the same problem.
Same level of bitchiness.
Yeah. Okay. Let's take one small pause here.
Yes.
So before we get super into it, because man, we jumped right the fuck in, which is rare for us.
Well, I think that's because I have a coffee next to me this time. I'm a little more.
Jesus Christ. You got coffee and beer?
Yeah, man. Well, one thing to keep me up and one thing to bring it down.
Nice.
You got to balance those psychoactive chemicals.
Got to keep it even. So what have you been up to?
I actually had a pretty good couple weeks.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, well, nothing like, just entertainment medium related, nothing particular in my actual life. But I started reading this really good book series. Well, really good. It was a pretty good book series. But the important part was it got me back into like fantasy reading, and that got me back into like magic systems. And so that managed to pique my interest, to bring this all full circle, to a game called Arx Fatalis.
Okay.
Which it was actually, there was the big Bethesda sale. Going on last week, and it was $2 because it was released in 2002. And it's by the same people who did like Prey and Dishonored.
Oh, okay. So Arcane Studios.
Arcane, yeah, exactly. And it's their like first version of the Dark Messiah game, I guess you could say.
Oh,
like if you ever played the Dark Messiah game,
yeah, we played Dark Messiah Might of Magic or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the one where you could kick people into spikes.
Yes, exactly. Yes, that one, that game. So it's the older version of that game.
Oh,
without kicking into spikes. And with a like Dark Souls-esque level design instead of just strictly separate levels.
And what's it called?
Arx Fatalis.
Why have I heard of that? I don't even know if I've heard of that.
Yes, you almost certainly have.
Okay.
It has a really unique magic system.
Okay.
Where there's like rune-based magic systems in some games where you have like runes that you combine to do magic.
Yes.
Yeah, and so it's a successor of that system, which is originally like Ultima, apparently, which I've never played.
Okay.
But that's like the big successor to all RPG games. So
like Ultima, as in like Ultima Online, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, Ultima Underworld.
Okay, so so the same Ultima series that I'm thinking of. Okay, got it.
Yes, it's that one, the big one.
Yes.
And so it's just like it was such a good game, dude. Like it's like I've had trouble finding anything else that was as good as it now. Cuz it's like holy shit, just like, interconnected world, really cool setting. It's like the sun has gone out.
Ooh.
And so everyone has to live underground.
That sounds really interesting for a fantasy series.
If you are interested in it, I'll say this disclaimer now. You need the Arx Libertaris like fan patch to play it, because it's one of those games.
Okay, it's old and broken, and
it's old and broken. Exactly.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, and
that's
so
that's,
just like
that's an interesting setting for a fantasy game. You know, like because I associate the whole like sun going out thing with so much more like a sci-fi setting.
oh, okay, yeah,
You know,
yeah.
because like when I think about like that, it's like oh, people living underground because the sun's gone out. Blah blah. That's always like nobody acknowledges the sun in a fantasy setting.
Yes.
It's always like that's always a sci-fi thing, and so for that to be the setting of a fantasy game, that's actually really interesting.
Well, it's crazy because like the people in this setting are like aware of other planets,
Oh, that's really interesting. So
Like,
it's almost like a half fantasy, half sci-fi setting.
but it is kind of half. But there is no high technology.
Well, yeah, I mean, it would
Pure fantasy with like sci-fi knowledge. It's weird.
It would be like low sci-fi, I guess, or
Yeah,
like
very-
or
very
light
low.
sci-fi because
Like everyone still lives in castles.
Yeah.
And there's kings and peasants, but they're also like, oh yes, the other like our planet is dying. Like this is not good.
Interesting.
But the really cool thing is the magic system in that game because it's rune based, like I said. But the really cool thing about it is it's an active system, so you actually have to like use your mouse to make the rune symbols.
Oh,
to cast magic.
It's that game.
It's that game. Yes.
Okay, I know exactly what you're talking about. I was kind of wondering if you were going to get to that. I was like, yeah, okay, that is what it is. Okay,
Yes,
I know
it's that
about.
game.
I've heard of this game, obviously, as you said.
And so like I never played it in the past because probably as you think like that magic system used to be considered like broken.
Yeah, I think I remember that it was like, oh, this could have been really cool, but it was completely didn't work.
Yeah, so they've like the community patch like recodes that system to make it like work correctly.
Interesting.
And it's like it's up. I would say it's like up there with like Morrowind for my favorite magic system of any game now.
Really? Okay, that's really nice.
Well, because the thing I find with most rune systems is they're really limited.
Uh-huh.
It's like you can put a fire rune on the ground,
Yeah.
or you can shoot the fire from your hand, or you can like create a fire barrier around yourself that does damage to people, and it's like that's it.
Yeah.
And it's all just elemental flavor. And it's like in this game, there's levitation and like repelling undead and like bless. There's like healing spells using runes, and there's like hidden runes, which is crazy. So like the healing spell is a certain combination of runes. It's Ra Vitae. God, I've actually memorized the runes. That's how good it is. But what's crazy is like if you know what those mean, like Ra is increase and Vitae is life, obviously, right?
Okay.
So like there's a rune for decrease, and if you do that, Mega is increase, Ra is the decrease one, whatever. Anyway, if you do the decrease one with the life rune, it's like a harm spell, but the game doesn't like tell you that. Like it's just like it never puts it in your spell book for you to like reference. It's just like if you know that, you know it, but if you don't, tough shit, motherfucker.
That's really cool, actually. That's fucking like so. It is literally it's spelling out words essentially with the runes, and it actually makes logical. Wow, look at that.
Yeah.
Why hasn't anybody else done this? That's fucking brilliant.
And it makes magic like feel even with combat and stealth as like a gameplay element.
Yeah.
Because like you're in combat and you're literally having to like make these symbols with your mouse as you're trying to avoid getting hit, and it's like, oh, I feel like a mage. Like I got really good at casting the fireball spell.
Yeah.
Just like that was my go-to. It's just like this fucking spell I know off heart. I can do it in combat. That's what I'm using.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I guess that would make sense
anyway.
too. It's like, yeah, that's what you would do. It's like, oh yeah, you know what? I have a rune that I'm really good at. That is going to be my main shit.
Yeah. It's like that. It's like I had plenty of other spells that were better. It's like, I could summon demons and like stop time and shit. Yeah. But like those are harder to do than fireball.
Well, now that you're itching for another excellent game, maybe you should play Disco Elysium.
Yeah. But Disco Elysium doesn't have a cool runic magic system.
No, but it has the best writing in any video game ever, and also some of the best writing I've had. Like I've read. Like it's like how people like I'm not the first person to say this. Like this is what everybody has taken away from this, but like people like they say like, oh, like the writing in that game is good, but like good for a video game. This is not good for a video game. Like this, I think they are going to actually make a Disco Elysium book, and I think that if I recall correctly, one of the creators or both of the creators are writers. It's not well written for a video game. It's well written. It's like
you mean authors?
Authors, yeah.
Yeah, because everyone's a writer.
Well, not everyone can write.
I apologize to anyone whose career is actually writing, but You know what I mean?
Yeah, you could be a typist.
Anyone can claim to be a writer.
Yes. They are. Yes, I believe they are actually authors, and
Published authors,
or at least one of them is, or something. But
that's cool. Yeah, I mean, I really do. I think about it a lot. I want to be really honest. I like every time I'm like, okay, what game do I want to play next? I'm like, I should play Disco Elysium.
You really should.
Then I'm like, oh, but do I want to like immerse myself in like a really realistic, corrupt political system?
You do.
That I already live in.
Okay, but it's also hilarious.
Okay. It's funny too.
Oh yeah, and like you can like the choices that you can make. Like you can play it really straight and you can play it really serious, but you can also play it hilarious.
Okay, that's okay. See, that's an important that actually does make me want to play it more for sure.
Yeah, you should 100%. I mean, like when I played it two ways. I played it as like, very like serious and like, down to earth the first time. And then the second time I was like, fuck, I'm just going to make dumb decisions. I'm just going to be a meathead. Because like the first one, like I played it like a, kind of like a weak dude that was like extremely smart and perceptive. And then the second time I played it as a dude that like was really empathetic and strong, but just dumb as a fucking rock.
And the second time was more fun.
They were both fun. That's the thing. Like it's like neither was, and you get a completely different like because like certain things. I mean, I'm not going to spoil too much for the game, but basically like you can raise your stats by being a drug-addled alcoholic. So if you choose not to do that, and you choose to actually like keep your shit together, you get very different paths through the game. By playing one way or another, because, like the guy that's smart will be able to figure things out that a guy that is, strong will not be able to, but a guy that's strong will be able to, physically like intimidate and like get through certain situations that a smart guy just can't talk his way through, which is like, I played basically two very, very different playthroughs of it. Just by changing those stats. And it's just, I mean, like, and then also you could just play an absolute, like, fucking disaster and just drink yourself into a stupor constantly. And it's just, oh dude, it's just, I'm not going to say too much more. Like you just 100% have to play it. Like sure. I can't recommend it enough.
Yes. I mean, I have it.
Oh, you have it. Good. Okay. Cause I was about to say,
I've owned it for forever. That's why I'm always thinking about it. It's like, man, I should really just play this game that I own.
Yes, you should. 100%. Oh man. Well,
so what else have you been doing?
So I became hopelessly addicted to Sudoku.
Oh, that's sad.
Yeah. So there's this YouTube channel that, due to the coronavirus, became quite popular because people were stuck at home and had nothing else to do. And Cracking the Cryptic. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Nope.
Okay. Well, it became massively popular, and YouTube, doing the thing that it does from time to time, recommended it to me randomly, and I started watching it. And then I was like, oh fuck, I guess I'm going to do a bunch of Sudokus now. But oh my god, yeah, I've been spending an inordinate amount of time. Trying to solve Sudoku puzzles instead of
making
playing
numbers add up to other numbers.
Yeah,
you're doing math, Jason.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so they had this one, right, where it's like, the one that like everybody watched and that like got me into it. It's like basically it was a Sudoku that had like a bunch of extra restrictions, like numbers that are a knight's move away from each other can't repeat a digit, numbers that are diagonal from each other can't repeat a digit, et cetera, et cetera. And then the Sudoku had two given numbers and you could solve the entire thing uniquely. And it was like insane.
Oh, yeah, no, I might have seen that actually.
See? I told you. Yeah.
I did, yeah.
So I was like, shit, that's so fucking cool. And so then I started doing Sudokus. So I've been up to that. But
that's cool.
Yeah. So, and actually I like a couple weeks later, I went and solved that because I'd already forgotten like what the solution path was for it. And so I was like, can I solve this? And like I sat down and I actually could solve it. It's actually not that hard of a puzzle once you like start, because it's like it just kind of goes.
Trick.
Yeah, the trick. It goes step by step, and it's like so that one, and I actually solved another one last night, was really interesting. But like some of those ones that have like, because like it turns out actual just straight up Sudokus are really fucking hard, and actually those extra restrictions make it way easier sometimes to solve the puzzles.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah.
So that's what I've been up to. But I've also been playing XCOM.
Oh, let's go. Wait, before we move to XCOM.
Yes.
On the topic of like weird puzzle games, just yesterday, I watched like a sketch, a James Bond sketch where he plays like the game Mastermind.
I've heard of it.
It's like you have like 6 colors and you have to match like 4 colors in order.
Okay.
That have been pre-selected. Anyway, I'm just saying it because I always hated that game.
Okay.
I thought it was really stupid. But yesterday I figured out the trick, just like you were saying, where it's like, oh, I get it now. I see what you have to do. Because the game never specifies that you can have multiple colors, like of the same color.
Okay.
So I finally figured that out last night, and it just made the game way easier.
I don't think I've ever seen this game, actually. That's interesting.
You never played it? It's pretty... Okay, I'm going to stop at well known because you've never heard of it. But yeah, just search Mastermind.
No, I've heard of it. I don't think I've ever actually physically seen what the game looks like. So yeah, I have heard of it.
Okay.
But I've never actually like in passing, right? It's like, oh, the board game Mastermind, and I'm like, oh, okay, I don't know what that is. Like, there was no mental image in my head when you said the word Mastermind, other than I knew it was a board game that existed.
A board of colored pegs.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And it's just like, I mean, it's exactly what you're saying. Just like once you figure out the trick to a puzzle, it suddenly becomes a lot easier.
Interesting.
Oh, have you ever seen that, just another puzzle thing? You ever seen that Japanese video with the impossible puzzle that the old guy can't figure out?
Yeah, that was so good.
Yes. Oh, just like, another just like, oh, okay. Like, I see. Yeah, that stuff is so satisfying.
It really is. I love watching people solve, especially really hard puzzles. Like that's super interesting for me.
Yeah, that stuff is so good.
But, yeah. So, XCOM.
Yeah, XCOM.
Speaking of my power going out, my power went out while I was playing it the first time. Corrupted my save about an hour in, so I had to start over. Luckily, I was just doing the tutorial for the most part, so I actually could start over much further along. Guys, I basically just skipped the tutorial. Then the second time, I was like, okay, you know what? I think I'm going to play this, I think I'm going to play it straight up. Like, I'm not going to save scum. And that was a mistake.
Yeah, don't do that first time.
I almost immediately lost, everybody that I had, failed almost every single mission, and then I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to start over completely from the beginning, and this time I'm going to save scum the shit out of it.
Yeah. Is this your first time playing XCOM?
It is.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, so this might be hilarious to some people, but you know that, Mario and Rabbids game on the Switch?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Yeah, well, I played through that, and everybody was like, oh, that's just baby's first XCOM.
First. Yeah, literally, yeah.
And I was like, oh, maybe I'll be into XCOM. And you know what? Actually, I mean, I like XCOM. It is enjoyable. But actually, I found that Rabbids game to be really fucking good. Like to the point where because it's got the one thing that I like about it is it's got perfect information. Like in the sense of there's no fog of war. Like you can always see what the enemy is doing, so you don't have to guess where the enemy is.
Yeah.
Which I find actually way more enjoyable than having to randomly stumble upon enemies. I mean, obviously it's a more realistic, gritty, whatever thing.
Well, I mean, you know how we were talking about there's tricks to things like Sudoku?
Yeah.
There's tricks to XCOM.
I'm sure there is.
There's one trick.
Okay.
And when you figure it out, XCOM becomes very easy.
Which is?
Overwatch. Everybody but one person every turn.
Okay. I mean, I basically do that now. I'm almost always Overwatch. I'm almost always overwatching. I might not necessarily do everybody every turn.
You should pretty much only move one person.
Interesting.
Unless you have assaults. Once you get assault, there's an assault skill that allows you to do some crazy shit. And once you have that, the game becomes like an offense-based game. Mm-hmm. But where you are at the start, you need to really play conservative.
Yeah, I found that very early on, that if I move around too much, I just get my shit kicked in. So
yeah, super kicked in. Snipers and assaults, that's all your team should be.
Well, yeah, and I got to get that thing that allows my snipers to actually move, because it's so fucking annoying to not be able to shoot for a whole turn. So
yeah, I know XCOM very well, because it was all two of my friends, Chaz and Chandler, would play during college one year. It's every time I went over to their place, there was XCOM, and they were playing on hardcore or whatever, the Iron Man.
Iron Man, yeah.
So it was just constant restarts. Okay, we're gonna do it right this time.
Yeah.
It's they got really good at XCOM. You can get good at it.
Oh yeah, I am the skill ceiling, I am sure, is massive for that game. So no surprise there.
I honestly don't think it is. I think it's just tricks, like a few tricks, and you've done it.
Yeah, and
anyway, that's cool.
I'm still picking up on the tricks for sure, because
No, it takes a while. Yeah,
I suck at it, but that's actually I'm not doing horrible though. I'm doing much better than my first couple hours of playthrough, and now I'm much further along. It is a hard game. Yeah, I'm learning that very quickly. And what else? So actually, I finished a bunch of anime.
Oh, awesome. Okay,
yeah.
What'd you watch?
Okay, so I finally watched Cowboy Bebop.
You would never... What? Really?
I never watched it all the way through. I mean, we watched it on Adult Swim, in the middle of the night.
Oh,
And I think I'd maybe caught like 2 episodes of it max.
Oh my god, you'd never. Oh my god.
So
you
I
watched it in the English dub, right?
You know what? I actually watched it in the Japanese, which I know afterwards people were like, because I looked it up and people were like, actually, you should watch the English dub. Like the English dub is really the preferred version of it.
There's very few animes where you should do that, but that is one of them.
Yeah. Well, I watched it in Japanese, and actually, it was weird at first, but I got used to it.
Yeah, I mean, Japanese voice actors are all really good. So
they are
it's not
all really
this
good.
much.
I do want to watch maybe a couple select episodes again back in the English dub just to see how different
Heavy
it was.
Metal Queen. That one is so good in English, dude.
Okay, I'll watch that. I was gonna watch the last episode and
I mean, yeah, okay, yeah, sure, yeah.
I was gonna watch that last episode and that's another good one to maybe watch back in the English.
I just like the thing I'd say you get with the English dub is more like colloquialisms and like accents, more than like emotion. Like, because Japanese voice actors know how to get emotion in their voices. Like,
yeah, and like you kind of have to like fill in the blanks of the of the accents because like the dub does give you like accents, but it's like
yes,
you have to just kind of assume that it's there, even though it's like you're just speaking Japanese as far as I could tell.
Yeah, I mean, oh yeah, dude, all of the cowboy bounty hunter scenes are so good in English.
Oh God, I probably have to watch the one with the cowboy bounty hunter. Yeah. Okay, yeah. I 100% have to watch.
Got to.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. So I mean, what were your favorite episodes? What'd you think of it? I mean,
okay, let me think about this for a second. There was a lot less that happened than like I thought. I mean, for instance, I didn't realize it was only like 24 episodes or 26 episodes.
Almost nothing happens in Cowboy Bebop.
Yeah. No, like there was some like odd episodes here and there, but like overall, like I mean, like at the end, like I was like on the verge of tears. So,
oh God, of course. Yeah.
So like I mean, it was just like it was like simultaneously not as good as I remember and better than I remember somehow. Like it was like there are certain episodes where I was like, huh? I was like overall in the series I was like, okay, not as much happens as I thought happened in this series. And then but then at the same time I was like there's certain individual episodes in there that were like just really 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 good. I feel like the first like half of the series is excellent. I feel like there's a bit kind of like between like the first half and the last third that drags a little bit.
Okay. Like I don't remember those ones specifically.
Exactly. I think that's probably why.
Yeah.
And then it just like the last third of the show is just like a fucking roller coaster. Like, 'cause I mean, you get like what is it? I mean, it's the like. The last couple the last 3 episodes obviously are huge, and like even like a couple of the episodes before that I think were quite good. There was like a bit in the middle where I was kind of like, okay, these like there was the one episode with like the dude and his daughter that was like almost entirely pointless, like where like he's he's the chi master or whatever the fuck it's called
yeah that one where he has to like go to a really nice city.
Yeah. Almost nothing happened. I was like, did this need to have been an episode? I don't know. But, like, otherwise, I mean, yeah. The aesthetic and, like, the tone of that show is just so fucking good, Like, it was great. So, like, I really, really, really enjoyed, like, I really enjoyed it. Even if there was parts that I was kind of like, like overall, like the series was great. So, and I have to go back and watch the movie because I think I've seen it, but I need to actually like make sure I've seen the movie.
Yeah, I was about to say, you need to go watch the movie 100%.
Did we watch the movie together? I almost thought that we did, but
I'm almost positive I would have showed it to you.
Yeah, I feel like you made me watch the movie, which is, I honestly might have been the second episode of Cowboy Bebop that I'd see because I was like,
okay.
Thankfully
it's totally separate, so you can just...
Yeah. Well, because I've seen the mushroom episode. That was an episode I recognized. And then I think I'd seen the movie. And I think that's all the Cowboy Bebop I've seen. I might have seen parts of the last episode, actually.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm sure. That's probably just like Adult Swim bumps.
Yeah. That wouldn't surprise me either.
What'd you think of the Pierre LeFou episode with the guy with the top hat?
That was another one that I was kind of lukewarm on a little bit.
Really, you didn't like that one?
I'm not saying I didn't. I'm not saying
episodes.
I'm not saying I didn't like it. I just kind of was like, okay, Well,
sure. I mean, yeah, but I mean, so many of the episodes don't have any like
point.
value on the ongoing series.
Oh yeah, I mean most of them don't. I mean it's almost entirely episodic. But no, I don't know. Like there was something about that episode where I was like, by the end of it, I was like, okay, I wasn't like amazingly jazzed about it.
Yeah. The first half of the episode is the best for sure.
Oh yeah, like the first. Oh yeah, but yeah, because like by the end, I was just kind of like, okay,
like you get it. Yeah,
Heavy Metal Queen was great.
Yes.
Like the cowboy episode was great.
I'm looking at the list of episodes here, and you're right. A lot. The first half is very strongly weighted.
It is. It's like almost all of like the things that I think of when I think of Cowboy Bebop like happen in the first half. And then it does.
Yeah.
It kind of grinds to a halt a little bit. I feel like they were kind of like, okay, we need to flesh out the series and then get to the end. But yeah, the first like handful of episodes too, are just fucking fantastic.
Yeah. God, it is one of those series where it just and the soundtrack. I mean, that's really the standout to me.
Oh God, well yeah. I mean, the soundtrack of that show is just. I mean,
you know what you get to do now?
What do I get to do?
You get to go just listen to the soundtrack by itself. Because because the Seatbelts are like an actual band. And so like they do...
Oh yeah, no, I know. I've listened to the Seatbelts. They're great.
Oh, okay.
Oh yeah.
Not the Seatbelts. What am I saying? Oh yeah, Yoko Kono and the Seatbelts. Wait a second.
Yeah, it is the Seatbelts because that's who did the first...
Yeah, what the fuck? What
the intro.
Is the other... What's the... Oh shit, what the fuck is the band that did the other Fooly Cooley? What's that band? Oh, that's the Pillows, not the Seatbelt. Okay. I get my Japanese anime bands confused. Just ignore me. I'm an old man.
My damn Japanese anime bands. But
can't figure them out.
But
Too many does.
I also finished Mushishi, or at least the second season, the one that was on Crunchyroll.
Oh, nice.
Which I enjoyed.
Yeah, it's great.
And then I'm currently watching Monster, which I will, at a later date, I will.
Monster.
What was that?
Oh, you're watching Monster.
Yeah. It's
boy.
I mean, it's great.
It's one of the best animes ever made.
It's fantastic. I actually I told the parents about it, so hopefully they'll watch it because it's on YouTube.
Oh God, really? Now you're gonna force me to watch it.
Yeah, it's great.
God. Oh God.
It's on YouTube in 1080 pizzas. I mean, it's fantastic.
90 episodes of like tense thriller. I don't know if my heart can take it.
Oh, it's so good. All right, shall we talk about some beer?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's talk about beer, man. All right. So first of all, you said you were drinking a wit beer.
Yep.
Which one?
Blue Moon Belgian White.
Of course, yes.
Yeah.
The classic knockoff Belgian White.
Yes. Blue Moon is like a Budweiser or something, right?
Yeah, I think it's that or like Miller Coors or something.
Yeah, Miller Coors. Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean it is not a craft beer. Actually, it's funny. Blue Moon is not called Blue Moon in Canada. It's called Belgian Moon. I think specifically to try and get rid of the association that Blue Moon has in the U.S. of being a fake craft beer.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah, they're like specifically trying to hide the fact that it's the same beer. But like I know. So I was like,
yeah, I bet. Yeah, that's why we're doing this podcast. You got all kinds of beer knowledge.
So, I mean, you didn't start drinking beer until fairly recently, if I recall correctly, right?
Yeah, especially regularly. I probably only started like a year or two ago.
Yeah, because I mean, we both grew up in a wine household for sure.
Yeah, we're Eastern European, or at least half.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, and so like we both came to beer late in the game.
Yes.
So like I didn't really have any beer knowledge from excuse me. Yes, I didn't have any beer knowledge from like growing up and like knowing anything from like I didn't have any associations, I guess, with beer other than it was something my parents didn't really drink. Our parents didn't really drink, obviously. And not really something that like I had like any knowledge about. It was just kind of like, oh, beer is that thing that like I don't really like understand why people drink it. It's kind of gross.
Yeah.
Like every beer. Yeah, like every beer that I'd had up to that point was just kind of like, okay, like I guess, like I don't really get it, Whereas like wine, like I got because like wine, especially the wine that like our parents were drinking growing up, it was like a little bit on the sweeter side, and it's like it was something that like was very approachable.
Yeah, you say that, it's still pretty disgusting.
So like, what do you drink when it comes to beer?
I mean, if I can, it's cerveza.
You mean like Mexican beer?
Yeah, Mexican imported beer. Yeah, just like piss water, if I can get it. Like
Wow.
Modelo, I really like, or Pacifico are my two favorite.
Really?
Yeah, just like cool because what I really want is small beer. That's what I really want, but that doesn't exist anymore.
Oh,
So
you mean
Cerveza
like
is like a 3.5%. You know, it's very low alcohol and it's easy. It's like carbonated water with a little bit of like bread flavor.
Yeah, no, I get that. And actually, sometimes I do really enjoy like a Mexican lager like that. You know, like and Modelo's actually pretty decent, like all things
I
considered.
love
Like,
Modelo. I'm so pissed I haven't been able to get it in like 3 months.
you know, there is a place for beers like that, like 100%. And it's actually interesting. The so they tried, I believe it was in Mexico. They tried like there was some like craft breweries that like went down there, or there was at least some craft brewers that went down there and tried to like do what happened in the US in Mexico. Right? Because, I mean, Mexico has a beer drinking culture like the U.S. does. And so, like, the logic was sound in the sense of, like, you know, let's go down there and let's brew, you know, like, beers and, you know, like, show them, like,
some
the
really
like
bitter, super hoppy beer that American college students like.
Well, so here's the thing, right? So Mexican beer is a lager. And the primary beers that are brewed by brewers, at least, like, hobby brewers, like, you know, there are... And when I say hobby brewers, I mean people that aren't like aren't starting to buy like a lot of equipment that they're brewing in they're brewing on a stovetop. They're like me. They're brewing in a stovetop, you know, they're probably
on a stovetop.
Yeah, they're probably using a bucket, you know, like instead of like, you know, like good equipment, you know, and under those circumstances, being able to produce a lager is basically impossible. You know, you could brew, and so I guess let me pause there. Do you know do you understand that you do not understand the distinction between a lager and an ale?
They're all beer to me.
Okay, so man, all right.
It's like some beer doesn't even use hops, right? Like that was new information to me.
Oh, that's sort of true, but it's almost
technical? Okay. Well, let's take a step back then.
So let's start because I think what is that? Is that called Groost or something?
Okay. That's a totally different thing. I thought there was just like you could get like there was non-hop beer and that was just like a standard kind of beer. But if it's weird, then never mind.
Gruit. Yeah, Gruit. That's okay. So and actually it's man. Oh god, this is all coming together right away. This is fantastic. Okay, so first of all, let's take a pause. The distinction between ale and lager. So basically there's two broad categories of beer. Like all beer, again, and you know what? I'm going to just say this right now. Disclaimer. This is my own knowledge. You know, this is as best as I understand beer. So I'm probably going to get a shit ton of this wrong.
Yeah, if you're typing an angry comment right now, just give it a second.
Yeah, this is a lot of the things that I'm going to say are generalizations that are like 80% true. There's probably some untruth to what I'm saying, but 80%, this is probably about right, and I think we'll find out afterwards that it's probably closer to 60% right. But
this is pure B- beer information right here. You know,
absolutely, yes.
Can't get quality like that anywhere else.
So, the two broad categories of beer are ale and lager, and the main difference is how they're fermented. So, ale is warm fermented. And uses what is called top fermenting yeast, which is basically yeast that like tends to sit towards the top and, you know, is more amenable and does its best work in like room temperature or thereabouts. Whereas lager yeast, or what's called bottom fermenting yeast, does its best work at like, you know, I would say like maybe around 50 degrees Fahrenheit, something around there. It's like, you know, not quite, maybe even slightly lower, but like not quite fridge temperatures, but definitely colder than room temperature. Okay. And the big difference between those two strains of yeast are that the bottom fermenting yeast produces a lot fewer like off flavors, and it also tends to what's referred to as flocking out. So I'm gonna throw a lot of terms at you. Flocking. So okay. So there's when you talk about yeast, there's a couple terms that like get thrown out. There's flocculation, there's attenuation, and then I think it's like alcohol resistance, I think is the other thing.
So the alcohol they produce doesn't kill the yeast.
So the alcohol they produce doesn't kill the yeast.
Got it. Makes sense. Oh man, specific gravity and stuff. Yeah, I've heard of how you calculate that before, and it just seems like a huge pain in the ass.
It's really not. It takes like 2 seconds to calculate specific gravity.
Oh, really? Okay. Oh.
Yeah, it's really easy, and then you get to drink a beer afterwards. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, attenuation. It's the percentage of sugars that the yeast are able to consume, basically. So like a highly like attenuative yeast will consume almost all of the sugars and turn it like into alcohol. Versus a yeast that has a low attenuation, like it's going to leave more sugar in the beer.
Okay.
And then flocculation is basically the tendency for. Yeah, I know it's a funny word. It's the
that one in
tendency
particular is very funny.
Oh, I know that one is hilarious. I mean, oh, dude, don't even get me started on like sparge water and
Sparge
and the lauder mash tun. Like,
No,
I mean,
okay, you're making shit up now. I can tell. There can't be a larder mash tun.
and yet there is.
Yeah, there is.
But so basically, flocculation is the tendency for yeast to clump together and fall out of solution after they're done doing what they want to do, right?
Okay.
So basically, lager yeast, they really want to flock out. They really want to clump together and drop to the bottom of the fermenter and stop fermenting once they're done fermenting, which means that lager is super clear and super crisp, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's kind of the hallmarks of lager. And so they went to Mexico with, like essentially ale techniques because that's the easiest thing to brew. I mean, that's what I brew. I am not set up to do lagers. I can only do ales.
Oh, okay. Yeah, see that's very helpful information because now I know that this Belgian style wheat ale is cloudy because it's ale.
It's also cloudy because the yeast does not flock out very easily. In fact, Belgian styles, I think in general, have a very low flocculation yeast. Like the yeast that I use to brew my Belgian, again, it's very like my Belgian is also cloudy, for that exact same reason. And also, I think there's also usually things added to it. A lot of like wheat beers have like some oat content in the grain bill. The grain bill being the grains you use to actually make the beer.
I figured that's what it was.
Oats tend to introduce some cloudiness to the beer. But so, Mexico's a hot country, right?
This is not
ales are highly flavored and, like they're bready and all that stuff. And it's like, so you make a beer like that and it's not nice to drink on a hot summer day, out in the heat. It's not great. It was not popular. I should
also say I do drink my beer warm exclusively.
Why?
I don't like cold beer.
Why?
It's the carbonation and the coldness wreaks havoc on my stomach.
Interesting.
I can't do it. Cold. I open all of my beers like 30 minutes before I drink them, so they uncarbonate a little bit and get a little warm.
And also oxidize to shit.
Yeah, it's fine though. I can't tell.
So
it takes me 2 hours to drink a beer anyway. So
there's a couple enemies to beer. Heat is definitely probably one of them, but I was going to say oxygen and light. And there is a reason why Corona is in a clear bottle. Is because the beer itself is so tasteless that it actually gets some of its taste from the fact that it gets light damaged.
Wow.
Yeah, it's basically like having it out, like, because you have a Corona out in the sunlight, like on a beach or whatever, and the sun damages and like basically introduces off flavors to the beer, and that's the flavors that essentially are Corona, and that's also partially why you you traditionally squeeze a lime into it to kind of mute some of the worse off flavors, such that you get the better off flavors.
So what you're telling me is I should drink bottled Corona.
I mean, what you should do is just take it out in the sun and leave it there for 30 minutes.
No,
and then
but I want
drink
the flavorlessness.
Yeah.
I'll have warm Corona.
Warm canned Corona if you can find it.
There you go. Oh, that sounds great.
Go. Oh God. So you basically, what I'm basically hearing from you is you probably don't like beer all that much, do you?
No, I don't. No, I really don't. Whenever like a dark beer, like whenever someone orders a dark beer, it's just like that stuff is so like I don't want to say gross because I don't like it. It just tastes really different.
And when you say dark beer, you're referring mostly to Guinness?
Sure, or I mean, I've had a fair. I've had like that Philosopher beer, Midas Touch. I've had some. I've had like a dark curry beer before that was weird. And then I've had like IPAs. Those are you're talking about dark though.
You're talking about Three Philosophers, right?
Three Philosophers. But there's also the Midas King beer or whatever, Midas Touch beer. That's also I think a darker one.
Three Philosophers is a really good beer too. But different flavors.
Yeah, it just has a lot of flavor.
And you don't like IPAs, right? You're not a fan of those?
No, I definitely do not. In fact, I accidentally bought a bunch of IPAs, and I just gave half of them to my roommate, Chandler. It's like, you want these? Because I don't want these.
What IPA did you buy by accident? Do you remember?
Yeah, the beer that comes in like the green box. It's one of the big ones. Not Blue Moon, but major beer brand.
Goose Island?
No, we might have different beers. Yingling. Was it Yingling? No, Sierra Nevada. That's what it is. Sierra Nevada.
Oh, Sierra Nevada's... Okay, well.
Also, like I said, dude, I get my beer from Food Lion. Like,
Sierra Nevada's pale ale is fantastic. I don't know if you had that.
Yes, no, I like Sierra Nevada's pale stuff. I like all pale beer. That's good to me.
It's interesting because you say you like pale ale, which the IPA in IPA stands for India Pale Ale.
Okay.
So going back a little bit, so the ingredients to beer, if you're listening to the German purity laws for beer, which I'm going to try to get this exactly right here. The
Europe and their food laws.
Well, this one goes back a long time. This goes back to 15 and 16.
Yeah.
But according to German beer purity law, beer can only contain water, barley, and hops. And what you'll notice is missing from that is yeast.
Oh, I see.
Because in 1576, they obviously hadn't discovered microbiology yet and had no fucking idea what yeast was. They just know that if you left out water and barley, that you would attract wild yeast to it, and it would ferment, and they didn't know why, and it's because they were actually getting wild yeast in their beer, and it was turning it into beer. So they had to amend it at a later time when they actually discovered what the hell yeast was, and they were like, "Oh, that's the other ingredient." So basically, going back to IPA, India Pale Ale, India actually comes from the East India Company because you needed to ship beer because people wanted beer in, for instance, like, I guess probably in India, since, East India Company, right? Like, so British, British people stationed in India, like, during that time, and probably other places as well, I'm sure. East India Company obviously went everywhere, but, you needed to ship beer long distances, and the thing is hops are one of the things that helps preserve a beer, and the more hops you put in, the better that beer is going to preserve over a long period of time. So what they did is they took one of like a regular beer and they just hopped the living shit out of it because they were like, okay, cool. This is going to be enough to keep the beer preserved over like the long journey, to wherever it's going. Yeah. And so that's where we actually get IPAs and the whole idea of just like absolutely annihilating it with hops. But if you don't like IPAs, you might try to find, sometimes it's hard to find, like, because this is a fairly new beer style. Like, I say fairly new, like probably within like the last 10 years, or at least it became popular for sure within, I think, the last 5 is West Coast IPAs. Or wait, no, sorry.
I feel like I've heard that term before.
Wait, sorry. No, not West Coast, East Coast IPAs.
Okay, I definitely haven't heard the term West Coast IPA before then. So what are they? What's different about them?
Yeah. Well, because West Coast are traditional IPAs. That's like,
Oh, okay, I see.
East Coast IPAs is basically somebody, like, because maybe I should explain the beer brewing process a little bit. So, and I'm assuming you are in no way familiar with the beer brewing process.
Let me take a stab at it. You put water, hops, and yeast, and whatever else you want into a thing, and you let it sit for a while, and then you filter it somehow and add carbonation to it, and then you get beer?
You're close.
Okay.
So you're close. So there's kind of 2 avenues to beer brewing. There's technically more than that, but I'm going to really simplify it and say there's 2. There is extract brewing and there is all grain brewing. There's shades of gray in between those 2, but broadly speaking, that's kind of what you're working with. So what you are trying to, at the end of the day with brewing, you need to get something called wort to start out with.
Yeah, I've heard that term.
Yeah, and all wort is grains and water where the sugar has been extracted from the grains. Now, there's a couple ways there's broadly speaking 2 ways you can go about that. You can do it the all grain method, where you take malted grains that have been partially germinated, and thus have an enzyme to break down the the carbohydrate or whatever in the
Yeah, I know some
into
of
a
those words.
into a sugar, right? Like, because like that's essentially when a seed germinates, that's what it's doing. It's turning the thing that the seed can't use as food into something the seed can use as food. And that's what that enzyme does. So when you malt a grain, all you're doing is basically partially germinating it so that enzyme is created. Okay. You can then take those and you can put them in a like water that's like at a certain temperature, like water that's probably like it's warm, but it's not hot. And that basically provides an ideal environment for the enzyme to do its job and extract the sugars from that grain. So you basically leave it in that environment for about like an hour or so, and you have basically like a soup of grains that have all the sugars removed from them and sugary water. And then what you do with that is you raise the temperature of it till it's boiling or something or just higher than basically high enough to kill the enzyme. Stop the process of the sugar extraction, and then take that sugar and extract it into what is going to eventually be your boiling vessel, the thing that you're gonna make the beer in. So
okay, wait, whoa. So but do you keep the water that you got the sugar?
The sugar water is what turns into beer.
Okay, so you don't literally like extract crystals of sugar.
No, you extract sugar water.
Okay. I was like, why don't you just use sugar then?
Well, actually, I mean, you could technically, but then it wouldn't. I don't think it would really be beer. It would be something else.
It would be rum.
Yeah, probably. Well, it would be the starting point for rum. And actually, it's interesting. Like both liquor and beer actually start with a wort. Well, something. Yeah, I think it's still called a wort. No, it's called a mash. It's called a mash.
Yeah,
it's not called a wort.
Yes.
So they both start with a mash, and then like beer turns that mash into a wort, whereas liquor just goes on to distill that. And I don't know as much about distilling.
They never stop the sugar extraction process or something.
Well, they don't water it down, because in beer brewing you basically like the sugary stuff that you end up with, you need to water down to something reasonable, because otherwise it's got way too much sugar and you would basically create a beer that either would get up to like 15% and all the yeast would die, or and then you'd still have sugar left over and it would basically be like sugar beer, which I mean could be delicious, but you could do that, or you can do the way that I do it, because I don't have the equipment to do all grain brewing. You have the avenue of creating your own wort like that, or you can use what's called extracts. And all extracts is somebody's done all the work for you and then boiled off most of the water so that you're left with basically like a really thick syrup that is like the sugars and grain taste, essentially.
And you just add that to water.
And you just add that to water to rehydrate. And there's liquid malt extract and there's dry malt extract. Dry malt extract obviously is just drier. But and I mostly work with liquid just because I hate dry malt extract.
Oh, so you use extract.
I use extract. I do not have the equipment at the current time. And I don't know that I ever really will invest in it, just because brewing takes, so if you think about it, right, to create that initial syrup, basically, that initial sugary water, that's already an hour. And then on top of that, you typically boil a batch of beer for an hour. So I'm already at 2 hours. I get to skip the initial boiling step if I do extract brewing. So that's what I do. Some people, you have less control with extract brewing. Like, you basically have to rely on whatever somebody did, and you have to rely on whatever grains are available, as extract syrups. Okay. Or malt extract to be able to create a beer. But honestly, so far I haven't found that restrictive. And you can always get other flavors by doing something which is called by steeping, which is essentially you take malted grains and you do kind of like a mini version of the all grain brewing, which is basically you take crushed malted grains, put them in essentially a big tea bag, and then let them sit in your water for 30 minutes at a certain temperature water. And then you get the flavors and sugars from that just by doing that. And then you can add your malt extract and you can still get some of the flavors you couldn't normally get from just pure extracts.
Have you ever heard of buying whiskey barrel chips?
Oh yeah. Yeah, people do that.
Similar concept?
Yeah, it is I would say it's a similar concept. Yeah, it's instead of putting something, it's a little bit different, because basically what you're doing is you're just, I would say it actually is. Right, I would say it's similar.
The idea with whiskey barrel chips is you buy Everclear, some sort of clear alcohol, and then you just flavor your clear alcohol with those.
Yes.
Same idea.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Would
It's-
you ever think of using whiskey barrel chips in a beer?
If you're trying to create something that's like, bourbon barrel flavored or whatever, then yeah. I wouldn't suggest it unless you're trying to go that route because you're
Yeah.
going to make your beer weird.
I would say, you think it'd be, that sounds weird.
So I mean, if you were doing like a stout, then yeah, I could see adding bourbon barrel chips. Like that would make some sense, because like then you're like that. Those flavors meld well together. Whereas like a bourbon barrel IPA, that might be too much. I feel like that would probably clash. But that's the nice thing. And like one of the points that
would buy that shit up.
yes, they would.
Are hipsters even a thing anymore? I'm sorry to keep interrupting you. It's just, are hipsters a thing?
I don't know. Are hipsters a thing?
Has culture moved on from my college years? I assume it has.
It probably has. The world has left you behind now, Stephen.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Phones have become computers, and that was like 20 years ago. So
everyone's a hipster now.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sorry.
I mean, I guess under normal circumstances, I'd probably be considered a hipster.
We were hipsters.
Yeah. Well,
I mean,
I have a beard and I homebrew. I don't think that I have
you have a beard
now. Oh yeah.
Did you have that last time I saw you?
Yeah, I had a beard at Christmas, Stephen.
Okay. I guess you could call that a beard. You weren't Santa Claus level or anything.
No, I'm still not. But it's gotten better.
You were the butcher from The Boys. Almost. I've been rewatching that lately, so that's why I'm making the reference.
Oh man, new season of that's coming out soon.
I know that's why I'm watching.
Yeah,
it's so good.
But anyway. Yes, yes. My beard's gotten better.
Nice.
I figured I've been given advice on how to actually make it not look like
groom
shit.
it and trim it.
Yeah, now that I've learned that, I'm like, oh wow, that actually makes a huge difference.
It's amazing how many things require like work.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's the worst.
So I brew extract, right? It's the long story short, and I sometimes steep grains, not always. Like the beer that I just brewed, I didn't feel it was necessary because I did an all wheat beer, and I could find wheat extract, so I just used wheat extract, and it shortens, it shortens my brewing time by like 30 minutes, which makes my life so much easier. So you start out with that basically, and then you have to boil beer, and the boiling is really more of a sanitation step, but the boiling is also where hops come into play because there's a couple ways, and this is my roundabout way of getting back to East Coast IPAs. The way that hops work, right? Hops are filled with this thing called alpha acids. And what alpha acids are is they're the thing that makes things bitter. So certain hops, like varieties, have higher alpha acids than others. And basically, the longer you boil a hop, the more alpha acids it releases. The action of boiling is what releases those alpha acids into the solution. So very bitter beers, like sometimes you'll hear of things like 120-minute IPA or something. I think Dogfish Head has a 120-minute IPA. Basically, they've boiled that beer
for 120 minutes.
For 120 minutes to extract just a tremendous amount of bitterness from the hops. So West Coast IPAs, that's kind of the deal, right? Like the traditional IPAs is the hops are to add bitterness. There's definitely like hops used for flavoring, and those are used kind of later in the boil, like maybe towards like the 5 or 10 minute mark, where you're mostly not extracting bitterness. You're getting basically hop flavor into your beer.
Yeah.
East Coast IPAs are almost the exact opposite. They use actually very little hops up front, and some of them can even be done in like 30-minute boils because you actually aren't even adding the hops until the 30-minute mark. So you can actually start the boil much later. And because you don't,
yeah,
go ahead.
I was going to ask why.
Yeah, because you don't need, like, the only reason to boil for a full hour is because you want to extract hops at the 60-minute mark. If you don't need to extract hops, I mean, you could boil the beer for 5 minutes and it'll be done if all you need to do is add, hops at the 5-minute mark. Like there's no compelling reason to boil for an hour other than hop extraction. That's the whole point.
I'm sorry. Why do you boil at all again?
That's how you extract the bitterness from the hops.
Oh, so most beer isn't boiled.
All beer is boiled.
All beer is boiled.
All beer is boiled. Because
most of them only for a short amount of time.
Almost all beer are boiled for a full 60 minutes, but you're adding very little hops at the end. Because think about it like this.
So
right?
Even a lager?
Yeah, because here's the thing, right? If you think about it from a cost effectivity standpoint,
yeah,
you extract more bitterness from the hops the earlier you put it into the boil. So
Sure.
if you want very little bitterness in your beer, you can use a tiny amount of hops at the very beginning, like just like a pinch of hops at the beginning of the beer, and boil it for 60 minutes and come up to your appropriate bitterness. Versus if you boiled for 10 minutes, you need to put a shit ton of hops.
I'm sorry. What's even the point of hops then?
So hops has two purposes. There are bittering hops. There are hops you add at the beginning of the boil to extract bitterness and basically give your beer that bitter quality, because all beer to some degree has a bitter quality. Like it's obviously massive shades of gray there. Like, you could go from a very bitter beer like an IPA to an almost not bitter at all like a stout. And stouts, it would not be surprised.
Really? You would use stout? I would use like a lager, right? I mean,
Lagers are bitter. I would say lagers are bitter.
Yes.
I mean, like the bitter, I mean, like, I think you might be confusing bitterness with like the pininess of hop
right.
flavor.
That's exactly what I'm doing.
It is, because like Corona is still bitter. It's just not piney,
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Yeah.
But that pininess is actually all achieved at the back end. It's all achieved in like the last 10 minutes, because because obviously you've never done this and obviously I have, but like if you smell hops smell like citrusy and piney for the most part. There's different variety. I mean, there's like a million different varieties of hops.
Yeah.
But like on the whole, citrusy and piney are like the primary things that you get out of hops. And so like that, to get that, you basically add the hops at the later stages so you don't destroy all of those compounds, because, all of those compounds, I mean, like you cook, that all of like those aromatic compounds
die.
are very ephemeral, and, you destroy them with heat. So, the hops you put at the beginning are adding no flavor. They're just adding bitterness. Whereas all of the hops you add at the end are adding all those aromatics and all those flavors to the beer. So the East Coast IPA style is basically very little bitterness up front. So like very little hops in, like, there's a measure called IBUs, which are international bittering units. It's basically the measure of how bitter a beer is.
I love the international standards for like food stuffs like that.
I knew like a month ago when we talked about doing a beer podcast that you were going to laugh your ass off at IBUs. And here we are.
Because I know there's an international tea standard, and I know how shitty it is. So.
Well, the international tea standard. Oh man, I'm not okay. You know what?
You've seen the Tom Scott video.
I've seen the Tom Scott video.
Yeah.
There's a reason why the international tea standard exists.
Yeah. To our listeners, who we barely ever talk to, you should go watch that Tom Scott video if you haven't seen it.
It's fantastic.
Yeah, it is.
But anyway. The international bittering, basically, like it's the measure of how bitter a beer is. Like a beer like what I'm brewing. Actually, I can actually tell you what the IBUs of my beer are, or at least what the theoretical ones are, because I use a beer calculator to figure out all my recipes. Because beer is complicated. But mine is probably something in the neighborhood, and yours probably very similar, because like we're both drinking a wit beer, and they're both not very hopped beers. But so my beer recipe comes out to an IBUs of 15.9. So let's call it 16, which is pretty typical of a not very bitter beer. Something like, like a strong, like the IPA that I like to brew is, my IPA clocks in at something in the neighborhood of almost 80 IBUs. So much more bitter.
Interesting.
Something like an East Coast IPA comes somewhere in the middle, somewhere around 40. So it's still bitter, but
I'm looking at the Brew Enthusiast site. Mm-hmm. A pale ale from Sierra Nevada is 38 IBUs.
Yep,
that doesn't seem right to me.
It is, because a pale ale, I mean, it's the proto version of an IPA. It's an IPA before they hop the shit out of it at the boil. That's what it is.
That's so. And yet the Belgian wheat I'm drinking right now has less IBUs than that. But I would say that the ale is way less difficult to drink than that Belgian wheat that I'm drinking right now. That's weird.
So there's a reason for that too, actually. What you're drinking right now, and what I'm drinking as well. So, as I mentioned before, right?
Yeah.
Like in our last podcast, I talked about how, like, the beer that I brewed, it contains coriander and orange peel.
Yeah.
So you mentioned right at the beginning, isn't there beer that's brewed without hops? And the answer is well, there was before people discovered hops. I mean, beer's been brewed since BC. It's been brewed since forever.
Yeah.
And hops is something that doesn't grow everywhere, and yet everybody makes beer. So how the fuck did they make beer? Well, beer has always been a little bit bitter. Like, that's always been an element. Like, because if you don't add any kind of bittering agent, you're basically left with something that I think would accurately be described as malt liquor. Like,
oh, okay. Okay.
because if you think about malt liquor, it's kind of sweet and alcoholic because it doesn't contain any bittering agents, or at least contains so few as to be almost imperceptible.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So that's what you're left with. So how the hell did they brew beer without hops before? Well, the answer is shit like orange peel and coriander and pine and, any other number of things. And that's where gruit comes from. Gruit is beer, is proto beer. It's beer before they discovered hops, where they used like fruits and herbs and other shit to try and make the beer slightly bitter before they had the option of making beer bitter with the preferred method, which is hops. And that's where wit beer, white, like Belgian wit beer came from.
Yeah.
It's like a middle step between the two. Is like they still enjoyed the flavors of like the orange peel and the coriander, but they had already discovered hops and they knew how hops worked, and so it's still hopped, but that orange peel and coriander help add more bitterness to the beer in their own right.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So it's just they're full flavored.
Yes. So I wasn't really exposed to beer brewing until I moved to Minnesota, which I lived very briefly, like a year and a half in Minnesota. But I knew that beer brewing existed, but I don't think I knew any home brewers. And then when I moved to Minnesota, I guess home brewing is a fairly big thing in that state because I met I think at least 3, if not 4 or 5 home brewers in a very short space of time in Minnesota. And basically, I never really thought about the concept of home brewing until I went there because, I think I knew vaguely that it might exist, but I didn't think that, anybody really actually did it. It was, a really niche hobby. Well, it turns out, no, actually a shit ton of people, and, there's beer ingredient stores everywhere. I mean, that's where I get my beer ingredients. I have a local beer ingredient store here, and that's where I buy most of my shit unless I can't find it there and I have to order it online. I basically buy all my beer shit there.
And it's a strictly beer ingredient store?
Well, it's a beer and wine store. In terms of beer and wine ingredient store.
It's an IBO or
no.
It's not that. Okay.
No. It's a home brewing and home winemaking store.
They don't sell alcohol.
They can't.
Yes, okay. Because of law. Yeah.
Yeah, other than the alcohol they physically make on the premises.
Oh, but they can sell they can sell their homebrew.
Yes. I don't know if they can sell it. They can certainly serve it because I've had their homebrew there. I don't know if they can actually because they can sell the kits. I don't know if they can actually sell. I mean, there are breweries that exist, but I don't know if they're licensed. Yeah,
alcohol is
brewery.
really heavily licensed up there. So
yeah, it's very heavily regulated in Canada, but or it's certainly in Ontario. Maybe not so much in other provinces, but very much in Ontario. Because I've had beers there, they have beers on tap, and they'll be like, oh yeah, you want to try one of these beers, and then that's partially how they sell their kits. I mean, that's the way that I
style.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the way I brewed. My first beer was a kit. I basically they gave me a recipe, they gave me exactly what to do, and then they gave me all the ingredients, and I paid for them, and I made a beer. And theoretically, I made as close to a beer as their recipe allowed. But from there, it was all my own personal. Once I learned the process, it was all my own personal recipes. But
so what kind of touches do you do for your beer?
What kind of what?
Touches. What's your thing? Do you do anything?
Well, I mean, it depends, right? So, here's the thing, because this is kind of what I wanted to talk about a little bit is what do I do? What's my specialty? Well, my specialty is nothing. It's just I'm able to I just like being able to say I brewed this beer, even if I brew. But moreover than that is I came up with this recipe for this beer and brewed it. And it tastes good, and it's a good beer, and it matches kind of what I want the beer to be. And that's it. Because the thing that, and I'm not going to say this is a mistake, but I know some of the home brewers that I've encountered, they feel like they got to do something. Oh, I'm going to add raspberries to my beer, or I'm going to add a little bit of coffee bean, or it's they add shit, they add additional, and they gotta spice it up versus a normal beer. And what, if that's your jam and that's what you like to drink, Godspeed, right? Same with winemaking. I mean, if you want to add plums and orange peel and shit to your wine, and that's what makes you happy, that's great. Godspeed. Do what it, that's the joy of making these things. Yeah, that's the joy of making things on your own. But like, to me, I want to just make beer that I would want to drink. And I don't want to drink beers that have weird shit in them, other than this wit beer, which has coriander and orange peel. But like, what I want to get out of beer is, if I make an IPA, it's like, what's the IPA that I really want to drink? And in this case, like, the IPA that I brew is just like, it's basically a marriage of West and East Coast IPAs. It's 80, like, like I said, it's like 80 IBUs, so it's bitter. But then I also,
very bitter, yeah.
It's very bitter. But I also put a lot of hops at the back end. And actually, this circles back to finally what I wanted to talk about, which is after the boil, right? If you wanna add a bunch of hop flavor to your beer, the best thing to do to get purely flavor of hops and no bitterness is what's called dry hopping, which is where you add the hops to the fermenter rather than to the boiling liquid. So you add the hops after it's already cold. So you're basically extracting just hop flavor and not any of the hop bitterness, or at least a negligible amount of hop bitterness. And that's what I mean, like, so, like a normal amount of hops maybe to add. It's called dry hopping, which I think is actually kind of a bad term. It really should be called cold hopping, because the hops are wet. They get, they get wet. So maybe cold hopping would be the better term, but dry hopping is what it was called. So there it is. But so beer brew. So like East Coast IPAs, like a normal beer might have like a half an ounce, maybe an ounce of like dry hop, which will add a significant amount of hop flavor. I dry hop, 10 ounces.
Wow.
Which is actually probably a little bit too much. And actually, in my next batch that I do of the IPA, I'm gonna knock that down to maybe.
Yeah, that sounds like it'd be very lemony.
So actually, grapefruity is what I was going for.
Oh, okay. Grapefruity.
So the particular hops that I like to use, so my IPA is it's Simcoe and Amarillo hops, and those hops, they both have kind of like actually it's not even so much separately, but when you mix them together, they kind of like, it becomes kind of more than the sum of its parts, and the mix of flavors that they have creates this really pleasant kind of grapefruity note to it that I love. And so I just dry hop the shit out of it with Amarillo and Simcoe, and it's really tasty. But that's what I like, is like, in my mind, I'm like, I want a really bitter grapefruit forward beer, so I'm gonna make that. And I have to play around with the recipe. I don't always get it right the first time, but yeah, I mean, that's the joy of it for me, is like making exactly the beer that I want to drink, especially at that specific time.
Would you ever add like actual grapefruit, like grapefruit extract or something?
I might. I would consider maybe doing a beer similar to like a wit beer, where I actually add, like, after the fermentation is done, but before kegging, adding grapefruit juice to it. Because if you add it in the fermenter, like I did with, and actually I might change my wit beer slightly, based on that fact, but I added my orange juice actually in the boil, which is fine. It's because I actually got the idea. I got the idea from making black beans. There's a Cuban black bean recipe off of Serious Eats, where they squeeze like a whole orange into the beans as they're cooking, and like, because of like, you're boiling it in this like in the oils from the peel and like all of like the different the bits of the orange, you get this really nice floral orange like smell and flavor by the end of the beans cooking. And I was like, why couldn't I just do that with beer? And the answer is I could. And actually, the beer that I made got like a really nice kind of like floral orange smell to it, but it could use a little bit more sweetness. And I think I could do that by just adding straight up, squeezed orange juice in the end. But if you add it in the anywhere before that, like during the fermentation process, guess what? Yeast eats sugar. What's in orange juice? It's sugar. So it ended up being a much drier beer. I mean, I did expect it, but I think that I do want to add a little bit more sweetness next time, so I might actually squeeze some oranges into it at the end. But like that's for me, that's the fun of it, right? That's the whole point of beer brewing is making beers exactly how I want to make them.
Same appeal as cooking.
Yeah, exactly. And also coming up with my own recipes. I want to be able to like come up with my own beers, that are also still good. But like that's what I like beer brewing so much, because there is actually a lot of play space. You know, you have all of these things, like you have, you know, all the different grains you can use, all of the different yeast strains you can use, all of the different hop varieties you can use. You could boil for different times. Like, and like, you know, then you can get really fucking finicky with it, which I don't. But like, I mean, you could change your water chemistry. Like there's people that like add different minerals and stuff. Like they start with distilled water and add a bunch of like minerals and stuff to it to get very specific water chemistries to bring out very specific things in the grains and all. And like, I don't have time for that. Like, you know, like Godspeed to those people, you know, like who are like really serious about it, but like I can't.
Yeah, someone who's never tried a homebrew beer, I mean, they taste like regular beer still, obviously. So it's just like,
if I gave you my homebrewed beer and I gave you a commercially available beer, I think you would, in a triangle test, I think that you would be hard pressed to tell the difference.
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, I think I'd be hard pressed to tell the difference between an ale and a lager. So
yeah. Well, it's funny too, because like, so my Oktoberfest, which not October, it's a Mocktoberfest. So Oktoberfest beer is obviously.
Why do you call it that? Because it's not legally a German like.
So I'm about to tell you.
Okay. Yeah.
So as you can imagine, so I mean, lager, it's a German word. So as you might imagine, lagers are something that are very popular in Germany, and in fact, most beers that come out of Germany are in fact lagers. Oktoberfest, being a German beer, is no exception. It's a lager. So why do I call it a Mocktoberfest? Well, a Mocktoberfest is a term for an Oktoberfest that isn't a lager. It's not a real Oktoberfest because it's not actually lager. It's an ale.
You can't make lager. Yeah.
Because I can't make lager, or at least I'm not set up to make lager. So
yeah. You personally.
Yes, my Mocktoberfest is basically all of the ingredients for Oktoberfest minus the proper yeast. And what I actually use to, you know, so I've actually
use the top yeast, not the bottom yeast.
I need the top yeast. And actually I'm really my Mocktoberfest is my greatest. Like I nailed this on my first try and I felt really happy with it because my Mocktoberfest does something that most Oktoberfests don't do, which is, so most Mocktoberfests that I've seen, that people's recipes that they've written up, is they use I think it's like a yeast to make Kolsch. So what Kolsch is it's a German style before they discovered bottom fermenting yeast, or after they discovered it and then they wanted to try the lagering process with a top fermenting yeast is it's so basically Kolsch is an ale yeast that they ferment cold. I think that they ferment cold. I think that's right. I think that they cold ferment an ale yeast. I think that's how Kolsch works.
And so it doesn't work as effectively, so it produces a cleaner beer or something?
Something like that. I've never brewed a Kolsch, so I'm not actually terribly familiar with how they work. But long story short, most people if they don't use the Kolsch yeast, they use a yeast that is very similar to a bottom fermenting yeast, but it can be brewed at ale temperatures. Okay. And that's how people make their Mocktoberfest. And you know what? That makes a lot of sense, and it's totally legitimate. I went a completely different direction. I used a really strong dry English ale yeast. It's a yeast that is it creates a lot of malty flavors. Like it lets a lot of malty flavors into the beer, you know, because English ales, maltiness is one of the kind of like hallmarks of like dry English ale. And so, you know, they want that's what the kind of the yeast is leaving as much of that in the beer as possible. And it's also an incredibly flocculent yeast. So it ferments and then it just drops the fuck out.
Man, that shit's so flocculent.
It's so flat too. It flocks out like nobody's business.
All the time.
So it's super great because it ferments and then it all drops to the bottom and you are left with a really clear beer. And what I like about Oktoberfest, at least the Oktoberfest that I prefer, I like really malty Oktoberfests. So I was like, I don't really want a clean yeast. I want a yeast that's going to produce a shit ton of maltiness, but also leave the beer really clear. So I used this,
English.
Yes, White Labs WLP007. I used 007. It's
okay. All right.
And White Labs is
breaks, kid.
Yeah, White Labs is like almost everybody uses White Labs yeast because it's basically like, as far as I'm concerned, it's the best yeast. I mean, there are other yeast brands, but like for liquid yeast packets, White Labs is fucking amazing. Like, so I use that, and like the beer, I didn't bother with the step of like really clarifying the beer, which I will do next time. So it was a little bit cloudier than it should have been, because what you can actually do to really clear up your beer is you can actually add gelatin to the keg, and the gelatin will sink to the bottom, and on its way it will take all of the stuff in solution and pull it out and suck it into.
Cool.
It's really cool. And so like then basically the first couple pulls off your keg will be Jello, and they'll be disgusting, but like once you clear out the Jello at the bottom of the keg, it'll be completely clear beer. And so
because the keg pulls from the bottom, of course. Yeah,
because the keg pulls from the bottom. Exactly. So that's I think I'm gonna try that for next time. But yeah, the beer brewing process though, like it's the one thing that is really like interesting about it is like it's simultaneously not really that hard. Like, I mean, I've gotten to the point now, like I've brewed, let me take a look here. I can actually, because I keep a record. I got spreadsheets, man.
I was going to say, is it an Excel spreadsheet?
It is absolutely an Excel. It's actually a Google sheet just so that I can access it anywhere.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But it's a
spreadsheet.
Sheets.
Wow.
It's a spreadsheet. So I have brewed, let's see. I've brewed 2 of my IPAs. I've brewed the Mocktoberfest, I brewed the wit beer, and then I've brewed the kit the first time. So I've brewed 5 beers at this point.
Oh, okay, that's not that many.
It's not because it does take some time, and obviously you have to ferment for at least a week in most cases, but more likely something closer to like 2 weeks, if not more.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not like one of those things you can just knock out real quick. There are actually really powerful yeast strains that can actually, like make beer in like a couple days. Those are ridiculous though. Like those are like they're super high temperature yeasts, like yeast that you want to like, do at like 90 degrees, 100 degrees Fahrenheit, something like that, like way higher than you would normally ferment. So you actually have to like put like a warming blanket around the fermenter. But it'll ferment out in like a couple days, which is bananas. But
that bacteria is hungry.
Yeah, man, it absolutely is. So it is something that requires some amount of patience. And like I could get multiple beers going, because like once I keg up a beer, I could theoretically start another beer. But here's the thing is, like I said, beer brewing process, not really that complicated. It takes me about, I would say 2.5 hours on average, 2.5 to maybe closer to 3. It takes me about 3 hours to make a beer, like on the brew day.
That's not so bad.
Yeah. Well, it's about an hour of that is actually, is it 3 or is it closer to 4? It might be closer to 4 now that I'm thinking about it. Because I was about to say, it takes about an hour on my stove for 3 gallons of water to come up to temperature, because you need if you're making a 5-gallon batch, you need a decent amount of water to start out with. Like you can't start with too low an amount of water, otherwise it'll really there's all sorts of things with like hop utilization and like complicated math shit where it's like it's not going to work. So you need I used to brew with 2.5. I actually just recently got a slightly larger vessel that I could actually fit 3 gallons into, plus extract, plus hops, plus steeping grains if I need them, like, a decent sized vessel.
Wait, but you're making 5 gallons of beer.
So my fermenter can fit like 6 gallons, but I'm boiling about 3 gallons plus extract plus hops.
Yeah. And that makes 5 gallons of beer?
So you top it up with water, right? You make a sweeter, more bitter solution that you want to end up with, and that's where these beer I mean, I use Brewer's Friend, which is great. It's a free beer. You can pay for it, and you should. Basically, what paying for it adds is you could save recipes and stuff like that. At some point I might end up paying for it. Right now I'm just I'm just using the free version of it, which means that you can't save it. You have to retype in my recipes every single time, which is a little bit annoying, but for the cost of free, I will deal with it. And they're fantastic. And if you were brewing a shit ton of beer and you have never heard of Brewer's Friend, what are you doing? You should absolutely pay for that service, because it's a great service. But basically, that's where these calculators come into play, is because how it calculates all the things like hop utilization. It calculates like your wort initial gravity. It calculates and it does all that based on your initial boil volume. So how much water you started out with, how much water you want to end up with at the, like basically it's like you set your target in the fermenter, or you set your target like in the kettle, the kettle being where you boil. Like, I mean, it's like all this shit, right? Like it does all of the math for you. It's like it tells you when, if I add hops here in this amount, I'll get this amount of bitterness. If I add hops at this amount in this, point, I'll get this amount of bitterness. Like, it's like, wow. And it even calculates color of the beer for you, which is, I believe, called the Lovabond Index, if I recall correctly. So,
wow.
And that's actually, by the way, how I brew. When I brew, I'm usually trying to match a style, because I like a specific, but I want to match a style with like my own little tweaks to it. But basically, I want to hit my numbers. And so you can actually like out of drop downs, you could say, I want to brew, like in this case, a wit beer. So I was like, all right, I'm going to pull up the style guide, because there is a style guide, of course, for all because in beer competitions, like there is like a specific, like beer should be this color, it should have this amount of bitterness, it should have this amount of alcohol, et cetera, et cetera. And so I pull up the style guide for the beer and I start typing in shit, because I basically figure out the ingredients that I want to use that are, I pick style guide appropriate ingredients. I might throw like a curveball in here or there. Like maybe I'll add like a different grain or something, or, I'll steep with something weird or whatever. But like, by and large, I'm following the style guide. And I'll just start punching shit in until I basically get green on all my numbers. And I find, a beer that matches the style guide and still has all the ingredients that I want to use in it. And then I brew that beer. And then it comes out amazing every time.
So you kind of reverse engineer your beer.
I do, generally. Like there's like my IPA I'm a little bit more creative about, because I don't really care about the style guide. I'm trying to go for my own version of a style that doesn't really exist, which is like a midpoint between East Coast and West Coast. And that's, I guess there are beers that like, they dry hop the shit out of and also hop the shit out of, but I'm going for a specific flavor profile. And so I know what I want. So I don't really care about what the numbers are, in the sense of like, I don't care if they match the style guide. I care about like, is it going to have enough alcohol? Is it going to have too little? Is it going to have too much? All that good stuff. But, so that's, that's kind of like what I go after. But wow, where was I going with this?
Yeah, I was waiting for...
I forgot what was the beginning of that. You asked me a question that I got off on a tangent.
Oh, I don't even remember. You were just talking about how you like having your own style of beer.
Yes. Is kettle volume. That was what we were talking about.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Okay. So what we were talking about was, how do I get the 5 gallons? Well, I get the 5 gallons by topping it off with cold water. Yeah, that's what I do. But actually, although I actually do something slightly different, is I actually but I make sanitized ice, and I'll get into the sanitation in a second. But I make sanitized ice, and I use that as my my top up water, because I don't have anything to cool down the beer quickly, and I had been using just like putting it in the sink and like putting water around the kettle, which takes forever, and it's super, and I still do that to some degree, but like doing an ice bath sucks and it's annoying and I hated doing it. So I was like, can you just add the ice to the beer? And the answer is, as long as it's sanitized, the answer is yes. You absolutely can just add ice to the beer.
Yeah. You just boil the ice, or boil the water to make the ice.
Not as important, because I'm using tap water anyway. So as long as the tap water is fine to use, the tap water is fine to use. But what I actually do is I sanitize the vessel, and then I also like cover it in sanitized foil to make sure that like, there's no weird stuff getting in from my freezer. Not that I imagine there would be, but like, you want to do as little as you can, as much as you can, to minimize any kind of micro, bacteria other than yeast getting into your beer. Cause that's part of the reason why you boil it in the first place, is to basically kill anything that's in there so that you start off with a sanitized thing. But that's what I was about to say of what is the hard part of beer. Because I spend about an hour boiling my water. I spend an hour brewing, typically, an hour and a half, depending on if I'm steeping or not. And then I spend the rest of the 2 hours cleaning and sanitizing and all that stuff. Because the thing with beer is there's something called the hot end and the cold end. The hot end is easy. The hot end is just like, as long as you're basically following like normal like cooking sanitation procedures, like don't brew. Yeah. Don't brew in like a dirty kettle, don't don't introduce any bad shit into the stuff in the first place. But the cold side, everything that you use, like when I'm stirring the beer, when I'm chilling it, like initially, before I add the ice, because I try to chill it before I add the ice just to get it down to the right temperature. is like, the spoon needs to be in sanitized liquid until it's being used. I need to sanitize the thermometer that I use to check the temperature of the beer to make sure that like I don't kill the yeast when I put the yeast in. Everything like the fermenter needs to be filled with sanitizer until the moment that I'm about to put the beer in. All the stuff that I touch, like my hands, I need to dip my hands in sanitizer before I do it.
Have you had trouble finding sanitizer with everything going on, or?
No, because the sanitizer that's used for beer is obviously, it's not, I'm not using alcohol-based, sanitizer.
What is it then?
So, yeah, good question. So the sanitizer for beer brewing is something called Star San. And what Star San is it's an acid-based sanitizer that's food safe, which is super crucial, as you might imagine, since if I'm going to be taking something directly out of sanitizer and putting it into my beer, it better be something that I can also eat. So that's what I use. And that's what basically everybody uses is Star San. And it's basically like the way that it works too is like it's a no rinse sanitizer. So when I fill my fermenting vessel with sanitizer, and then when I pour it out, I don't rinse it afterwards. I just pour the beer directly in with some sanitizer still left in there. It doesn't cause any off flavors. It's the best goddamn shit ever. It's amazing. So
that's crazy.
That's what's used. Yeah. So it's like the phrase that you always hear in beer brewing circles is "Don't fear the bubbles," because that's basically like after you're done like sanitizing, it's filled with like foam from the sanitizer foaming up, and you just pour the beer right on top of the foam, and it doesn't cause any problems. I think it's even what like commercial breweries use. Is they use some version of, if not exactly Star San. Like it's the gold standard. It's what is used by everybody, and it's amazing. So love Star San.
Okay, interesting. But it's not alcohol based. It's just some chemical.
Yeah, it's an acid. It's a food safe acid.
Okay. I see. I understand. Makes sense.
Yep. So that is doing that, and then also cleaning up afterwards from the beer brewing is like half of the brew day, because you have to be so careful in getting making sure you don't introduce anything bad into the beer, because that'll ruin it immediately. You get any bacteria, other than beers that intentionally do that, like sour beers, which intentionally insert I think it's like lactobacillus, which is, why they're called lacto-fermented beers. It's basically like the same stuff that's in sauerkraut. It's what makes the beer sour. That's how it gets like that. And I think that those beers, if I recall correctly, were a product of before they understood yeast, and they would just leave the beer out to be fermented by wild yeast. And one of the things that always gets in everything, because lactobacillus is fucking everywhere, is lactobacillus. Yeah. So you get lacto-fermented beer, and that's how it gets sour in the first place. So, all that stuff. But
interesting.
Yeah, but if you want to, keep it to just the shit you want in the beer, you have to basically kill everything else with sanitizer and then introduce yeast. But so that's basically that's the most stressful and the most work, is dealing with the cold side of the beer process. But and then the cleaning is awful, because if you've never experienced liquid malt extract, if you think molasses is sticky, liquid malt extract is just the even higher level of that. It is incredibly sticky, and when it boils, obviously the vapors from the boiling have that sticky malt extractness, so it gets on your floors, and it's you just have to clean everything afterwards, and it's and God forbid if your kettle boils over, oh, you're in for a bad time. You're in for a very bad time, because then your entire stove is covered in the stickiest fucking substance known to man. I've thus far been able to avoid. I've been very careful about controlling my boil, but oh my god.
Yeah, you haven't had any big disasters?
I have had no big disasters, but if anybody listens to this and is interested in home brewing, I'm going to give some tips at the end of this. I'll just share my wisdom that I've learned from doing this already, to help you prevent, having any disasters like that, basically. Because I've had...
Well, let's hear them.
Let's hear it. Okay.
I'm curious.
So here's my disaster. So first of all, get a kettle that is big enough to fit your boil volume. If you're doing a partial boil like I do, where you don't boil... So a full boil, right? If you're trying to do 5 gallons, I think a full boil is something like 7 gallons, 6 or 7 gallons. Because the boiling for an hour, you lose a bunch of... I think it's 6. I think it's 6 gallons. You lose about a gallon from boiling for an hour, hard boiling. So, if you're going to do a partial boil, if you're going to do a 3-gallon partial boil, get a 5-gallon kettle. Leave yourself some space, man. Because if you boil over, it's going to be a bad time. And then the other thing is, as quickly as you possibly, if you brew one batch of beer and like, if you buy bottles, whatever, bottles aren't really not that expensive, but like and I still have my bottles, I just don't do anything with them anymore. If you decide you like beer brewing and you have any money to spend, buy a keg setup, because bottling sucks. So the problem with bottling is this. The whole point of bottling is that you need to introduce carbonation in the bottles in order to have carbonated beer. The way that you do that is you add essentially sugar or sugar water, really, to the beer bottle, and then put the beer in there, and then let the beer kind of ferment for a little bit longer, which basically pressurizes the bottle and introduces all the carbonation. If you fuck up that calculation and add too much sugar, you will create too much CO2 and blow the bottle up.
Okay. Yeah, I've definitely seen videos of that happening.
Yeah. And on top of that, even if you somehow manage to avoid that, which, I mean, in my first batch, I did. I think I undercarbonated my beers. I didn't. I put them in the fridge after, I think, like a week. Really, you're supposed to let them sit for 2 weeks. But I got scared, and I popped one open, and it seemed like carbonated enough. So I was like, all right, fine, fuck it. I'm just gonna stick it in my fridge. But then you also have to store, like, a 5-gallon batch is essentially a case of beer. It's almost 48 bottles. So you have to store 48 bottles somewhere, which is a pain in the ass. And they have to be cold because otherwise they'll keep fermenting and they might create too much CO2 and blow up your bottles, which gets back to step 1. And then also it takes another 2 weeks. So if you brew a beer, you have to wait basically a month before you can drink it. And I'm not patient enough for that shit.
Yeah, that sounds way, way harder.
So buying a keg and a kegerator setup is so much better because after you're done, first of all, you don't have to fuck around with putting stuff in bottles because putting stuff in individual bottles is a huge pain in the ass. You need to use, a bottling wand is great and it's a really cool invention. Like, Steven, next time you come up here, I'll show you the bottling wand and basically how it works. But it's essentially like a tube that is designed specifically that the volume of the tube is the exact perfect amount of headspace. So when you fill up the bottle, you fill it up almost totally to the rim of the bottle. And then when you pull the tube out, it leaves the perfect amount of headspace in the bottle. It's genius. It's so smart. But like, fuck, man, filling up 48 bottles and capping them is exhausting.
Yeah, 48 bottles is a lot.
It's a lot. And a 5-gallon batch
bottles.
is typical. There's plenty of people that brew 10-gallon batches. Like, so you'd have to fill up,
90.
Yeah, almost 100 bottles of beer on the wall. 100 bottles of beer on the wall.
Beer on the wall. Maybe that's where it comes from.
It's horrible. And capping, like, it's like, you got to cap and like, if you fuck it up, like, it's annoying. And it's like, nah.
So do you also need a cap machine?
I have a hand capper. It's not really like, it's basically just like.
So yes, you do need a cap.
You need a cap machine. You can't just, you can't just hulk it. Unless you have like super strong.
You're not capping things with your hands.
You're not capping things with your hands. It's basically like 2 levers, and it's just like it just presses the cap down and it squeezes.
Yeah, but you still need a machine.
Need a machine. You need.
Yeah, so more equipment.
Exactly. And so, I have all that because that was, I obviously, like, a keg is expensive. A kegerator, like a fridge and a CO2 tank and all, it's expensive. But the nice thing about a keg is basically the way that I now do things is, and this also lead me into my other thing, is I basically just, like, I have a stainless steel fermenter, which is another thing that I will explain that in a bit. But basically, like, I just open up the tap on that. The beer comes out. It goes directly into the keg. I close up the keg. I put it I purge it like of air, put it on the carbonation, and I force carbonate it. And that's the other thing that I would consider you should definitely try doing is if you do decide to get a keg, try force carbonating. Basically, you want your beer to have an effective CO2 amount in it of about 12 psi, right?
Sure.
That's like a normal amount of carbonation for a beer. So what you could do is you could put it on 12 psi for like 2 weeks, and after 2 weeks, it'll be carbonated. And that's the normal way to carbonate beer. Or you could force carbonate it, where basically I crank it up to about 30 psi, and I leave it for about 2 days. And you can even shake it up and get it. There's people that basically what they do is they put it on like 60 psi or something ridiculous like that. Like put on 60 psi for like 10 minutes, turn off the CO2, shake the shit out of it, put it back on 60 psi because the shaking actually like gets the carbonation through the beer more efficiently. You could do that too. And you can actually, I've seen people carbonate a beer in like a couple hours. Like it could be done. It's really easy to overshoot like that, but it can be done. I just do it 30 psi rather, for 2 days. And then drop it down to 12. It's usually a little undercarbonated on the first day, but like after that, it's usually perfectly fine. And then I could drink.
You have to do it for 2 days.
Yep. If I I shook it, it would take less time. It's not instant. No.
Okay.
But like it's not instant because the carbonation needs to get through all the beer, and it takes time for the carbonation to enter into the solution of the beer. It's not an instant process.
It's not like a soda stream.
It's not like a soda stream at all.
That's what I'm imagining in my head.
No, it takes 2 days. For me, it takes 2 days, and 2 days feels about right because at 30 psi for 2 days, there's almost no chance of me over-carbonating the beer, which you could fix, but it's annoying. I'd rather undercarbonate it and then like get the rest of the way like over the course of a week versus undercarbonate, like overcarbonating the beer and completely fucking like having to like do a whole bunch of shit to fix that, and that's annoying. So then I just drop it down to serving pressure, basically the pressure that you actually want to serve the beer at. You want it to come out of the lines, and then that's it. Mission accomplished. So I suggest that. It makes it so much easier. And then I would super suggest getting away from buckets pretty quick, because I started with a brewing bucket and an auto siphon to get beer from my fermenting vessel to my keg. And auto siphons, they're so easy to screw up. They're so annoying. Like, if you have any dry hop in there, the hops are going to get stuck in the auto siphon, and it's not going to work, and it's going to be a huge fucking pain in the ass. Oh, God. I hate auto siphons. If you can make them work, great for you. But my beer brewing vessel now, I spent some money, and I think it was money well spent because like everything that I've done so far in my beer brewing experience has just been to make beer brewing like less of a pain in the ass so that it's actually more fun to do instead of like an enormous piece of shit. Because the problem with auto siphons is if you fuck it up and you introduce air, you're going to get an air bubble stuck in there, and you got to somehow get the air bubble out of the auto siphon. And air is horrible for beer, so you end up with oxidized beer, and then the beer is screwed up. And so you have like beer that's just like it's a pain in the ass. What I have is a stainless steel bucket. SS Brewtech is who I bought from. I have their conical fermenter, their brew bucket, which is great. The conical fermenter, basically what it is it's got a cone in the very bottom of it. So it's on like legs, and it's got a little cone to catch all of like the hops and the yeast as they fall out of solution, so that they don't end up in your you don't end up actually pulling those into your final beer. And then it's basically got like a little it's called a racking arm. It's basically like a little like tube inside there that you can actually rotate as you like turn the spigot, so that you can get all the beer without getting any of the yeast. And so all I do is I put a sanitized hose on the outpost, like on the out spigot of the fermenter. I turn a little tap, and then the beer just comes directly out and right into the bottom of the keg. So I don't I don't end up with any air in there, because obviously if you have beer falling through the air, into your keg, that's a problem, because then you're introducing, again, a shit ton of air. So, and that would always happen to me with the auto siphon. Is like I was trying to siphon the beer, the little like tube for it would come out of the keg or come up on the keg, and I'd end up having a beer waterfall that was again oxidizing my beer and fucking everything up. So,
how much does this whole setup cost you?
So $700 Canadian for a kegerator. I think it was about $350 Canadian for the brew bucket, the fermenter, the conical fermenter. And then the kegs, you can actually buy them used. I have one used one and I have one new one. It's basically the same. Like, used kegs are usually pretty cheap.
Yeah.
So like keg, probably like another, I think maybe it's like 50 to $100 for a keg, if I recall correctly. And then like plus all the other beer brewing equipment. Like you need like a big brew kettle. I think mine was maybe like 200 some odd Canadian for like a big stainless steel 5-gallon like stock pot. Essentially, that's what it is. It's a stock pot. And then yeah, so I mean it's not cost effective, like at the very least. But if you enjoy brewing beer, if that's fun for you, the thing that takes away the fun is all of the shit that makes it annoying, like racking beer from.
Wow, really?
Yeah, I know, right? Racking beer from the fermenter into the keg I think it's worth spending money to not have that be a pain in the ass. I think it's worth not having bottling being a pain, especially if you're not patient. Like, I mean, if I'm not patient, so I want my beer sooner. Spending the $700 to get a kegerator was a no-brainer for me. Like, if you have the money to spend on that, it will make your life so much easier, and you could drink your beer faster, and like that's it. That's what I want, is being able to drink my beer sooner, because I want to try it. I'm interested to see how it turned out. That's the fun for me. And then the other thing that I would super suggest is, so the brew bucket, there's an optional, very cheap accessory, which is a blow-off tube, like it's a blow-off arm that you can attach a tube to. So you can use a regular float valve type thing that like for CO2 blow off, because as it ferments, it creates CO2 inside of the fermenter, and that CO2 needs to go somewhere. So normally it's like a 3-piece, like, I can't remember what the term for it is, but it's like a 3-piece valve essentially that you put sanitized water into, and it burps. Well, beer, as it's fermenting, creates a bunch of like foam, and if that foam gets into that thing, it'll clog it up. And once it clogs it up, that means that you have a bomb.
Oh, okay.
And if you blow so there's plenty of videos online of people having to mop their ceiling because they blew the top off of their bucket. It's not fun. You don't want that to happen. So, and like, cause what happens, right, is like, the little like 3-piece valve, like it's in there with just like a rubber stopper. And that rubber stopper, if that comes off from the pressure, it'll just shoot beer directly up onto your ceiling, and it's a bad time. So what I have a really, like, the biggest diameter tube that I can get. And I think for the brew bucket, it's a 1/2-inch diameter, so it's plenty of space. So if the foam on the top of the beer, the krausen, as it's called, if the krausen starts creeping its way up into the tube, it's no big deal. That tube is big enough that CO2 is still going to be able to flow through it, even if a bunch of foam gets up in there. And like, basically all it is a tube that goes into, like, I usually use like a mason jar. You just fill it with sanitizer, and so the CO2 goes through the tube, and then it comes out the other side, and it goes into the sanitized liquid, and then that's it. Mission accomplished. Nice. It's really, blow off tube. Don't bother putting a normal, like, valve on there. Just put a blow off tube. Save yourself the hassle of ever having to clean beer off your ceiling. You don't want to have to do it.
Yeah, that sounds like a nightmare.
Yeah.
It sounds like I'm going to be buying my beer from stores still, is what it sounds like.
Much like many things, beer brewing, I mean, so right, like God, this beer is good. Sorry. Much like the...
Oh, you don't say.
I like my own beer, which is part of the fun of it. But much like much like many things, like, it's not actually cost effective. Like, I think I spent like maybe $100 on ingredients for this beer, and I'm getting a 5-gallon keg out of it. That is cheaper than buying regular beer. But with all the money that I've spent so far, I have obviously not broken even. That's not even close. I'm not going to break even for many years, because I usually only brew maybe like a couple beers a year. Like, because the cleanup is lengthy, cleaning up the keg is a pain in the ass. Like, it takes time, like, it's not super outrageously fun to do all that cleaning stuff. But like, if you enjoy a hobby, I think the difference between like a hobby and something that like just like a regular activity you do is, a hobby is the thing where you are willing to put up with all the bullshit of it in order to do the fun thing. Whereas most people that just do it act like, going to a brew place and having them brew beer at their place, and you just basically mix the ingredients together, you're not doing beer brewing as a hobby. You're doing beer brewing as an activity, which is fine. And that's probably a better way for most people to do it, because that way you don't have to deal with all the cleanup. You don't have to deal with all of like all of the effort, they basically just tell you what to do and you do it. If you're willing to put up with all the effort and actually do beer brewing as a hobby, it's really, really fun and rewarding. And there's like such a huge play space in terms of what you could do with beer. But my God, you do have to put up with a lot of bullshit. And it does cost, in order for it to still be fun, I think it costs money. I think it costs money for it to be enjoyable as a hobby, but definitely worth it. Absolutely. So yes, I would not suggest brewing beer unless you really like beer, and then B, really want to be able to create your own beer. You want to basically make something that is yours, that you've said, I want these things in that beer and I want it to taste like this. And then you make it, and maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but then you just try again next time, and like, that's fun. If that doesn't sound fun to you, you will hate beer brewing.
That doesn't sound very fun.
Yeah. So, man, we've talked a lot about beer brewing. That is a lot of stuff. Yeah. Do you have any other questions? I know you wanted to know about gravity. I'll tell you that really quick. Because that's actually, especially now that I have this fermenter, it's actually really easy. Basically, all you do for gravity is there's something called a hydrometer. It basically measures the amount of suspended, like it basically measures the amount of sugar in a liquid. It's tuned very specifically, and basically it's just like it looks like a thermometer, and you just drop it in liquid and it floats. And like where it float, like the line where it floats, that tells you basically what the initial gravity is. So I have like a test tube and I have a hydrometer. I pour beer in the test tube. I put the hydrometer in the test tube, and then wherever it balances, I take note of that line and I write that down. That's my initial gravity. That's the amount of sugars that are currently in the beer to start out with. And then after I'm done fermenting, I do that measurement again. And then the yeast has obviously turned that sugar into alcohol, and alcohol is like, it causes the hydrometer to sit at a lower point. And so the difference between the point it started at, the higher point, and the point that it like ended at, the lower point, it's the initial and final gravity, and the difference between those is the alcohol content. It's basically how much of that sugar got removed by the yeast and turned into alcohol. It's really easy, and then you get to drink the beer at both stages. So you get to drink the sugary beer at the beginning and see how that tastes, and then you get to drink the kind of proto before it's carbonated, final, like warm, uncarbonated beer at the end, and it's just kind of like an interesting thing to do. It's like, oh, okay, this is how it is.
Yeah, so you have to compare two different readings, essentially.
Yep, and it's also how you can tell if your beer is done. You basically you have like a target final gravity, and once your beer hits that final gravity, it might still be fermenting a little bit, possibly, but I usually pull it at that point because I'm very impatient. So like if it's gone 2 weeks and it's within a couple like points of my final gravity, even if it's still bubbling a little bit, I'm just like, fuck it, I'm kegging it up. I'm terrible, but
there you go. I mean, no, that sounds good.
Yeah. And then so what else, man? What else you got? I mean, I know we're pretty close to the amount of time we wanted to spend on this, but you got any other questions? Anything else you want to know?
No, I've learned so much about beer. I don't think I'll remember half of it, but...
Well, you could just listen to this podcast anytime. I know you don't listen to these.
Yeah, I can't.
Yeah. I know I will listen to these. I will listen to these at least 2 more times, since I gotta do the initial run through, and then I gotta do the check to make sure that it still sounds good. So I will definitely listen to...
It's doing all the work.
Doing all the work. All right, man.
Good.
Hey, cheers.
Yes, cheers.
And we'll talk to you guys next time.
Yeah. See you guys for episode 10.
Episode 10. Oh my God, it's our 10th anniversary.
Yeah, we're already there.
Holy crap. Is that season 1? Is 10 episodes?
Yeah, that's season 1. Yeah, there we go.
Nice. Season 1.
Yeah.
All right. Talk to you guys next time.